This is a video about how to make great pizza at home. So let's start by discussing the timeline that you have to follow. So there are a few steps that I'm going to show you on camera, but a lot of the time is just sitting and letting the dough develop. So you have to start about 4.5 hours before you want to eat pizza. And the first step that I'm going to show you right now is to mix the sponge. So let me now talk about the recipe. The recipe that I use is from the Pizzeria Mozza cookbook. So if you want to learn more about making good pizza and other good recipes, I recommend this book. And while I'm on the topic of books, I learned a lot from these books too, by Ken Forkish. So I highly recommend this one, especially if you want to learn to make bread. And he wrote a second book, follow up to that one, all about pizza. Although I actually prefer his pizza recipes in this book more than this one. But anyway, okay, enough about books. So let's talk about the recipe. Okay, so all you need is flour, water, salt, and yeast. And this is a recipe for 2 pizzas, but you can scale it to however many you want. The amount of flour you need for 1 pizza, I use about 165 grams. So just multiply this by the number of pizzas you want to make. But these totals are for 2 pizzas. These are the baker's percentages, if you're familiar with those. This basically tells you the ratio of the ingredients. So the first step we're going to make is a pre-ferment called a sponge, where you use half of the flour. So the total amount of flour is 330. So you use half of it and the same amount by weight of water. Mix that together with the yeast, and that's gonna sit and develop for 1.5 hours. So I highly recommend using a digital scale for all of your ingredient measurements. So I'm going to use the stand mixer later, so I'm just going to mix the sponge in the bowl for the mixer. So I turned on the scale with it on there, so it's already tared. I'm just going to measure out half of the flour, which is 165 grams. I'm using all-purpose unbleached flour. I prefer the King Arthur brand. See, I put a little too much. Okay, there's 165. Now for the yeast, I need 3.3 grams. So I've got another scale for my yeast. This one measures to 1/10 of a gram. The yeast that I use, don't buy the little packets at the grocery store. You can get a pound of high quality yeast, this brand. Order it on Amazon. Just put it in a jar like this, keep it in the fridge. It'll last you more than a year probably, and you'll pay a lot less. So I have it on my other digital scale. This one measures to 1/10 of a gram, and I need 3.3 grams of yeast. And that's probably close enough. It's a little more, but that's okay. All right, so I've got my flour. Here's my yeast. I'm gonna mix it up real quick with a whisk. Okay. Now the water is next. So again, rather than do it with a measuring cup, I just use the digital scale to get the amount of water. Because remember that the ratios in the recipe are all by weight. And so it's easy just to do everything with the digital scale. So you want the water to be a bit warm, not hot, but a bit warm. So at least 90 degrees, no more than 110 degrees. That's what I would say. It's already warm. It's a hot day. If you want to be precise, you can measure it with a digital thermometer. But I don't think I'm going to do that. All right, so the sponge is equal weight water and flour. So I've got my bowl on here with the scale tared. I just need 165 grams of water. Okay. I'm gonna wash my hands because I'm gonna mix the dough, the sponge, with my hand. It's the easiest way to do it. Alright, so this is the water that I measured. I'm gonna just pour it in there and mix it. And it's gonna make something with the consistency of something like pancake batter. That's what you want. So you just want to get everything mixed together well. It's probably good enough. I'm gonna scrape it off of my fingers and also scrape down the sides of the bowl. So if you start doing this at home when you do bread baking, you probably want to get some of these bowl scrapers. They're super useful. Okay, so now I've got the sponge all mixed together, and that's the end of the first step. So cover it up. I've got a lid that fits this nicely, and set a timer for 90 minutes, and we'll do the next step 90 minutes later. Cut.
Action!
Okay, so we've let the sponge rest for 90 minutes and develop. So let's look at the timeline where we are here. Alright, so here's the timeline. We left off here. It's been 90 minutes, so now we gotta mix the dough. So it's been 1.5 hours. So what do we do? To mix the dough, we've done this part. Now we have to add the rest of the dough ingredients to the sponge. So we have to add this much flour, this much water, and the salt. And that will complete the dough. Okay? So let's take a look at the sponge. Come over here. I want to show the camera the sponge. Look at that. It's big and bubbly. It's about 4 times the volume of what it was when we left off. And it smells nice. It smells like developing dough. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the ingredients and add them to the sponge. So the first is another 165 grams of flour. So I got a bowl on the scale. Okay. So that's the flour. Next, I need 72 grams of water. Okay, so that goes into, and we're gonna need the salt. I'm not gonna put that in yet. We're gonna mix it a little bit first, but I'm gonna get the salt ready. So we need 8.3 grams of salt. This is kosher salt. Probably doesn't really matter. I put a little too much. I gotta take some out. Alright, that's good enough. Okay, so I'm over here. We have the stand mixer with the dough hook. I'm gonna get it in there. I'm gonna mix it on low. And this step doesn't take too long. So I'm gonna mix it on low for maybe a minute or two, add the salt in, and mix it on low for a total of about, I don't know, 4 minutes or so. And then mix it on 1 minute for medium. And and that's it. So while that's going, I'm gonna prepare an area to handle the dough. So I have a board that I do make pasta and dough on this, and we're also gonna put the dough in a bowl, and we gotta oil the bowl so that it doesn't stick to the sides. So I have some spray oil here. I'm gonna use that. Alright, it's been about a minute, so I'm gonna add the salt in. So I've got my dough scraper. I'm gonna knock it off the hook and add in the salt. Maybe scrape down the sides of the bowl a little bit. Okay, so I just had it mixing on medium. I'm gonna get it off of the dough hook with my plastic bowl scraper. Get it into the bowl. Alright, so I have my board dusted with some flour so that it doesn't stick to the board. And I'm going to use the bowl scraper to get it out on there. Okay. Before I handle it, I'm going to prepare the bowl that it's going to go into. So this is just a bowl. I'm going to spray it with spray oil. This is to prevent the dough from sticking to the bowl as it develops. Here that doesn't really matter much. What I usually do is the same thing I do for bread. This is what they say to do. Just pull the edges into the center to make a ball. Flip it over and kind of make it into a nice ball like that. Put it seam side down in there and cover it. So let's look at the timeline again. So we just mixed the dough. We have to let it develop for 45 minutes until the next step. So I'll start recording again when we get to there. Let's look at where we are on the timeline. Last time we did this step. Now we're at the stretch and fold, so it's been 45 minutes. And look at how big it got. It's really big. So what we're gonna do is called a stretch and fold. Now, one thing that we never do with the pizza dough is we never knead the dough. We want the dough to develop with a complex network of bubbles inside, and we want to preserve those bubbles as much as possible. We don't want to squish the bubbles. So come back over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the dough from one side, stretch it, and then fold it over the top. Turn it 90 degrees, do the same thing. All right, so I grab it, I pull it to let it stretch, then I fold it over, turn the bowl, grab it again, stretch it, fold it over, grab it, pull it, stretch it, fold it over one more time. And then when you're done, you usually try and put the folds, the edges on the bottom. All right, so that was a stretch and fold. And you do this for bread and pizza dough, it's all the same. So this kind of rearranges it, and then you leave it alone and you let it develop. And we're gonna leave it alone for another 45 minutes. Then the next step is to divide it into 2 pieces. Okay, it's been 45 minutes since the stretch and fold. So now we're at the next step, which is divide. And so just looking ahead, we're 1 hour from when we're gonna make the pizza. And so in order to get the oven nice and hot, we also turn the oven on at this time. But we'll first do the divide. So look at that, it's grown a lot again. It's almost taking up the whole bowl. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna very gently take it out and divide it and make a little ball for each half, and then put them back in here and let them develop for another hour. So let me first get a little flour on the board. It's good to have the bowl scraper too, but we really want to be as gentle as possible with the dough. We don't want to squish all of that nice gas that's developed on the inside structure of the dough. So let's just gently take it out. Okay, so it's a nice big blob of dough. I'm gonna just eyeball it and roughly divide it in half. Okay. So now I'm gonna do what I did before, where I basically grab the edge, pull it to the center on top, go around like that. So after you do that, you flip it over and you kind of take your fingers and you bring them together underneath, and that kind of makes it make this ball shape. So let me make sure the bowls are nice and oiled. Alright, so this one, do the other one. Okay, you want to cover them both. I learned a trick from watching Jon Favreau's chef show. A good way to cover these in a reasonable way is to use a shower cap. So put the shower cap, now it's nice and covered. It won't have air coming in and drying it out. So before we stop, I want to show you something in the oven. So we want to let the oven get as hot as possible, and we turn it on an hour before we cook. But you want to have a pizza stone, or actually have a pizza steel, a baking steel. So this plate here inside the oven is a 1/4 inch thick of plate of steel. And so that gets nice and hot, and that's the surface that we actually bake the pizza on. So make sure your stone is on the oven shelf that you want to use to cook the pizza, or your steel, and turn on your oven as hot as it'll go. And we let the dough rest for an hour, and then we're ready to make pizza. That's it. So I'll see you in an hour.